It's great to be joined once again by Dave Zirin, sports editor at The Nation, also author of the book Brazil's Dance with the Devil. Dave, we've been talking so much about the World Cup in Brazil, and over the years, we've talked many times about what is the long-term impact of Olympics and of World Cups for the countries, for the people of those countries. And generally speaking, it seems like it's not nearly as good as many people assume. And I'm curious whether the situation in Brazil is the same as in other places or whether it's different.
I would only say it's different in Brazil, and that in Brazil it could actually be a lot worse. I mean, anywhere these mega events go, you see these three factors come up to greater or lesser degrees, and that's displacement of usually the poorest residents to make way for facilities, the militarization of public space, particularly in the post 9/11 era, and debt. And in Brazil, you're actually seeing all three of these things to a degree that is pretty unprecedented. I mean, in other places, maybe there's been more debt, like in Sochi for the Olympics. China displaced more people for the Beijing Olympics. But in Brazil, it's all coming together at the same time, right at the moment where the country appears to be in a mild recession. And so a World Cup and then a 2016 Olympics, which of course are going to be in Rio, that were supposed to be about launching and promoting Brazil to the world as a rising superpower, are instead for the people of Brazil really a symbol of what ails the country, which is poverty, inequality, and the strengthening grip of the oligarchy on the country.
Let's walk backwards through some of the factors you mentioned. Debt is an interesting one because we often talk about, as progressives in the abstract, how just looking at the deficit or debt of a country is not actually the most important determining factor when exploring how the economy is doing. So make the connection for the audience in terms of how, when it comes specifically to the type of spending on World Cups
Sure.
and Olympic Games, how does that actually affect the day-to-day of people in the years that follow?
Absolutely. I mean, the issue of debt and deficits, you're absolutely right. I mean, these are abstractions. The real question is who has to pay those debt and deficits when, because those are less economic questions than political questions. And in Brazil, what you're looking at are a record debt because the World Cup is going to cost more than any other World Cup in history. It's going to cost more than the last three combined. And you're going to see the bill presented to the working class in Brazil, which is going to be the sort of thing that only raises the temperature on a lot of the anger that's taking place. And one of the reasons why the debt is going to be placed on the working class of Brazil is that the real estate industries are getting all kinds of tax exempt status for the building of these stadiums. And FIFA itself, the international ruling soccer body, is pursuing all sorts of projects in Brazil, corporate sponsorships, get television rights, etc., without having to pay any taxes. They are tax exempt, as that's part of their deal when they come to their country. So Brazil is actually going to make record profits from this World Cup precisely while the country is accruing record debts. And that's the sort of thing that's in a lot of the Brazilian press right now and is actually aiding a lot of the anger that's inflaming people to go into the streets.
So we talked about the no tax deal that was struck by FIFA in Brazil on the show a couple of days ago. And I got a few emails from people saying, okay, David, that may be true, but isn't it also true that generally having tourists in the country, the ticket sales, the restaurants being full, presumably, etc., is there not some benefit? And this was a common refrain from people when we talked about the financial arrangement. What's the simple answer to that question?
Well, the simple answer is that's the same argument people make about the public funding of stadiums. And it's worth saying that even in the best case scenario of those arguments, what you're creating is low-wage labor in the service industry that's seasonal in nature, that only exists where if there are games being played or if there's a mega event happening. I mean, because otherwise, what do you think they're going to keep hotel workers on salary if there aren't people staying in the thousands of new hotel rooms that were built for the World Cup specifically? No, not at all. And that's the best case scenario. You know, low wage jobs that are seasonal in nature, that don't actually grow an economy or stop the rise of inequality. So that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that all of these promises are made that have to do with tourism and the growth of the tourist industry, and they just don't pan out. So what you get instead, and I've seen this with my own eyes in some of these countries that have hosted these mega events, are dilapidated, abandoned hotels. that look like they're from the set of The Shining or something. Like just this, this thing that's more of just a haunted skeleton of what was supposed to be this glamorous new locale for international tourism, and it doesn't pan out.
Before we talk kind of bigger picture, let's talk about those first couple of issues that you mentioned, which are the displacement, particularly of lower income people, as well as the kind of militarization of the police forces around the areas. We heard about this in South Africa, about how even the vendors that to some looked like maybe local vendors right around where the events were happening were really vendors that disproportionately just profited, sent profits up the chain to the corporate head, didn't really benefit the local economy. Is that the standard practice at all of these types of mega sporting events, or are there examples where the local economy does manage the sale of souvenirs or whatever the case may be?
No, because I mean, this is the corporate branding is really the brass ring for FIFA in this whole process. I mean, that's the big prize. So in South Africa, as I think you've discussed in the past, I mean, they even passed through trademark law through the South African government to ban the selling of anything that had the words World Cup or 2010 by street vendors. And so what these events do is they actually hammer the informal economy. Like if you want to sell a product, if you want to sell food, I mean, in London, they wouldn't even let fish and chips vendors sell chips because McDonald's had the French fry contract. So, I mean, these events hammer informal economies. And I mean, and in Brazil, I mean, I imagine you'll see a lot of bootleg gear, but unlike typical times in Brazil where it's kind of lax around that sort of informal economy, that sort of a street sales economy, I mean, you're going to see that criminalized and frankly militarized during the World Cup because that's what FIFA demands.
Okay, from a moral point of view, right? I'm from Argentina. I love the World Cup. Every 4 years, I look forward to it. It's unimaginable to me that I wouldn't in some way at least watch these games. What are people to do? I recognize every issue you're talking about. Is it moral to even watch the games? I mean, how does the individual manage this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think it's a moral question. It's a political question. And anytime we talk about boycotts, the first question is there a call for a boycott inside the country? Like, are the social movements, are the people who, as we speak right now, David, are getting tear gassed and arrested in the streets of Sao Paulo, are they, in fact, calling for a boycott? And the answer is that they're not. There is no call for a boycott coming from inside of Brazil. And so to do so would only be an act of kind of personal moralism. And I get that too. I mean, there's no international boycott against Nike, but I can't bring myself to put on the old swoosh because it just, it's like too much and you just can't do it. But that being said, let's forget that for a second and say that, I mean, I really think that part of being conversant in the political issues that are happening in the World Cup, part of that is also you have to be conversant in what's happening on the pitch and what's making people so excited in the first place. So I have every intention of watching soccer when I'm down in Rio. I'm heading down there today. I mean, I'm going to talk to people while we're watching the games. I mean, that's an important part of the experience. And if you lose that part of it, then you don't really understand why this is such a big deal in the first place.
Boycotts aside, is it even reasonable to think that the entire corporate structure around events like the World Cup and the Olympics could ever change? Or is it just impractical to think that in the world we live in today, this is how these events work? It's a completely plutocratic, corporatist thing, and you either accept it all or you don't.
No, I think change is very possible because I think that for one, FIFA is starting to buckle under the weight of its own corruption. I mean, the awarding of the games to Qatar in a situation that may have been bribery infused, not to mention the fact that hundreds of workers have died already in the building of stadiums in Qatar, not to mention the protests that are taking place in Brazil. I mean, these are the sort of things that FIFA can only really stand so much of. Before there are genuine calls for real reform. I think it's important to keep the pressure on FIFA. They are a closed society. They're an undemocratic society. So I actually think the more we have these discussions, the more opportunity there is to see FIFA change.
All right, we've been speaking with Dave Zirin. He is sports editor of The Nation and also author of the book Brazil's Dance with the Devil. Dave, thanks as always for joining us.
Thank you so much.